Hello Daily Drafters and welcome to the Shadows over Innistrad Remastered Limited Archetype Guide here on the Daily Draft channel. This video will cover all of the archetypes, key cards, synergies, and more so that you can effectively prepare for its release on MTG Arena on Tuesday, March 21st. Let's dive in. Before we look at the first archetype in today's video, I'd appreciate if you consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. These set reviews take a lot of time and have to be done on a strict schedule, and I'm doing everything I can to get them to you when I know you need them. Remember, YouTube doesn't allow a single content creator to make a single penny off of their content unless they have a minimum of 1,000 subscribers, a number that we are rapidly approaching. So if you think I deserve to be rewarded for the content I make, a subscription is all that's needed to help the channel head in the right direction. It's absolutely free for you, so there's really no reason not to. This set review will be ever so slightly different than my usual set reviews on the channel. Firstly, if you'd like to learn about all of the set mechanics and interactions, I've released a separate video covering all of that information for you, and you can find that link to that video in the upper right hand corner visible right now. Secondly, because this is a remastered set, it doesn't look like Wizards has provided us with a signpost uncommon for each of the color pairs. I usually like to start each section with that color pair signpost uncommon, but we'll be skipping that section today because some of them just don't exist. And lastly, as of the creation of this video, it's unclear if Wizards has spoiled the entire set or not because these remastered cards don't have set numbers. What I can confirm is that at least 90% or more has been spoiled, so we'll just roll with those numbers for now. Alright, with all the housekeeping out of the way, let's dive into today's first archetype. The first archetype that we will cover today is Red-White, which in this set is just your run-of-the-mill aggro deck. We get this archetype quite often, and while it may be boring, it's usually pretty straightforward. With any aggro deck comes aggressive creatures, and a few of these in these colors include Devilthorn Fox, which is just a 2-mana 3/1, Drogskull Shieldmate, which is a 3-drop with flash that can give your creatures a toughness boost on ETB, Deranged Whelp, which is simply a 2-mana 2/1 with menace, Guardian of Pilgrims can give a temporary buff to another creature on ETB, and Fiendbinder can tap blockers down when it attacks. How else can we push our creatures through if not for combat tricks, and some decent ones for this deck include cards like Faith Unbroken, which gives +2/+2 and removes a creature. Strength of Arms gives +2/+2 for just 1 mana and could even make a 1/1 in some cases. Rush of Adrenaline gives +2/+1 and trample for just 1 mana. And Uncaged Fury gives a creature +1/+1 and double strike out of nowhere. Some rares and mythics you might want to keep an eye out for in this deck include Flameblade Angel, which can ping your opponent whenever they try to mess with you or your stuff. Sin Prodder is a 3/2 with menace that can also give you extra cards or even direct damage to your opponent. Selfless Spirit is an aggressively costed flyer that can also protect the rest of your board if needed. And Thalia makes sure that your opponents stay a step behind by making their creatures and some of their lands enter the battlefield tapped. Next up we have Blue-White, and this is the first of our many tribal decks in the format, in Spirits. We don't get tribal formats too often, but here we do, and these decks are usually pretty straightforward. We'll start with some notable spirits for the deck, including Tattered Haunter, which is an aggressively statted flying spirit. Spectral Shepherd is another flyer that can protect your spirits if needed. Fogwalker is a spirit that locks down opposing creatures when it ETBs. Guardian of Pilgrims is a spirit that buffs another creature until end of turn. And Drogskull Shieldmate is a spirit that can ambush opposing creatures and buff your creature's toughness until end of turn. Most of the payoffs for this deck exist at higher rarities, but a couple at common and uncommon include Nebelgast Herald, which has flash and can tap a creature on ETB, and Apothecary Geist can gain you a little bit of life. Some of the rares and mythics for this deck include Rattle Chains, which can protect a spirit of yours and give other spirits you control flash. Mausoleum Wanderer, which gets bigger as you cast more spirits and can even sack itself to counter a spell. Selfless Spirit is another spirit that can protect the rest of your creatures if needed by giving them indestructible. And Bygone Bishop is a spirit that lets you investigate when you cast other cheap creatures. Our next deck is Red-Black, which is a mixture of a tribal deck and a set mechanic, and that is the combination of Vampires and Madness. There's certainly a lot going on in these colors, so let's first take a look at some of the vampires and vampire payoffs that exist for this deck, beginning with Call the Bloodline, which lets you discard cards to create a 1/1 vampire with lifelink every turn. Olivia's Dragoon is a 2/2 that can gain flying. Olivia's Bloodsworn is an aggressively costed flyer that can also give your other vampires haste. Insolent Neonate is a cheap vampire with menace. Fury Blade Vampire can grow to be as big as a 4/2 trample for 2 mana. And Blood Mad Vampire can grow as it hits your opponent. Next, we'll take a look at some of the Madness cards and enablers, starting with Tormenting Voice, which is a card draw spell that lets you discard a card. Stromkirk Occultist can be a 2 mana 3/2 trample if you can cast it for its Madness cost. Insolent Neonate lets you discard a card, presumably one with Madness, so that you can draw another card. Blood Mad Vampire has Madness. Fury Blade Vampire is a discard outlet for you. Call the Bloodline gives you a discard outlet with upside. Macabre Waltz can get back 2 creature cards from your graveyard and then also let you discard another card with Madness from your hand. And Olivia's Dragoon is a free discard outlet that you can activate more than once each turn to activate your Madness cards. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this deck include Collective Brutality, which lets you escalate its cost by discarding cards and gives you plenty of great modes. Falkenrath Gorger is a vampire with vampire synergies that also gives your vampires Madness. And Olivia, Mobilized for War, lets you grow your creatures when they enter and gives you another free discard outlet. Our next archetype is one of the marquee tribal decks in the format, and that is Green-Red Werewolves. We've seen this as recently as Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow, where they had mixed results, but let's check out a couple of the werewolves in this set, beginning with Gyre Reach Bandit, which is a 3/2 with haste that can eventually become a 4/3 that can help transform your other werewolves. Duskwatch Recruiter is a cheap creature that can help you dig towards more creatures and eventually become a 3/3 that makes other creatures cheaper. Moonlight Hunt is a bite spell that works with all of your wolves and werewolves all at once. And Ulrich's Kindred can give your other attacking werewolves and wolves indestructible. Some of the rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this deck include Spirit of the Hunt, which is a flash creature that can buff the toughness of your other wolves and werewolves. Arlen Cord is a planeswalker that can buff your creatures, make more creatures, and eventually do a whole lot more than that. And Ulrich of the Krellin Horde can give an enormous buff to a creature you control and eventually become a huge body that fights another creature. Our next deck is based around another one of the marquee set mechanics, and that is Black-Green Delirium. Black-Green usually has at least something to do with the graveyard, and Delirium is this set's version of a graveyard twist. So let's start with cards that can help you enable Delirium, starting with Crow of Dark Tidings, which can mill up to 4 cards for 1 body. Crawling Sensation allows you to mill 2 cards every turn if you'd like, and make some insects for your trouble. Grapple with the Past can mill 3 cards and give you some value by letting you return 1. And Vessel of Nascency is an enchantment that puts itself in the graveyard, replaces itself, and can help fill your graveyard too. Some of the Delirium payoffs include Thraben Foulbloods, which can get +1/+1 and Menace. Gnarlwood Dryad is a 1/1 with Death Touch that can become a 3/3. Obsessive Skinner can put a +1/+1 counter on a creature every single turn if you have Delirium. And Mourn Willow can make small creatures unable to block when it ETBs if you have Delirium. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this deck include Grim Flare, which can surveil cards into your graveyard and grow bigger if you already have Delirium. Ishkanah Graph Widow can create a bunch of spiders on ETB. Mindrack Demon mills you 4 cards to help with Delirium and is a 4-powered flyer for 4 mana. And Liliana the Last Hope can mill you for 2 cards as well as get extra value for you with her other abilities. Our next deck is another one of the tribal decks in the format, and that is Green-White Humans. Human is the most printed creature type in all of Magic, so let's see what humans can help us out in this format, beginning with Thraben Inspector, which is a 1-drop human that also comes with a clue. Nearheath Chaplain is a human that can be exiled from your graveyard to give you 2 spirits. Ironclad Slayer can return an aura or equipment from your graveyard to your hand. Fiendbinder is an aggressive human that can tap down a creature an opponent controls. And Dauntless Cathar can also exile from your graveyard to give you a 1/1 flying spirit. A couple of payoffs that exist for this deck include Courageous Outrider, which can draw you an extra human from the top of your library. Hope Against Hope is an aura that can also give humans first strike. Hamlet Captain can buff all of your other humans in the middle of combat. Intrepid Provisioner can temporarily buff another human when it ETBs. And Veteran Cathar can give another human double strike until end of turn. Some rares and mythics that you should let pull you into this archetype include Sigarda Heron's Grace, which gives your other humans hexproof and can create more humans for you. Heron's Grace Champion gives all of your other humans a buff and lifelink until end of turn, and has flash. Tireless Tracker is just an incredible value of a card and also happens to be a human. Thalia Heretic Cathar puts a roadblock between you and your opponent and is also a human. And Thalia's Lancers is a 5-mana 4/4 with first strike that can find another legendary creature for you if you happen to have one. Our next deck is blue-green, and this deck cares about both investigating and cards with emerge. We've got another pair of set mechanics present here, so we'll start with investigate cards and investigate payoffs like Ulvenwald Mysteries, which gives you bonuses when your creatures die and whenever you sacrifice clues. Graph Mole gains you some life when you sack clues. Byway Courier dies into a clue. Briar Bridge Patrol investigates when it deals damage to creatures and can sneak creatures in if you sacrifice enough clues. Ongoing Investigation can be a steady stream of clue tokens in multiple different ways. Fleeting Memories can give you a clue and provides a small bonus for sacking clues. Jace's Scrutiny is a combat trick that also investigates. Erdwall Illuminator can let you investigate multiple times in a turn. And Drownyard Explorers gives you a clue when it enters the battlefield. A couple of uncommon emerge spells for this deck include Mockery of Nature, which can let you destroy an artifact or enchantment attached to a 6/5 body, and Wretched Gryff, which is a 3/4 flyer that draws you a card upon casting it. A few rares and mythics that slot perfectly into this deck are Tireless Tracker, which gives you a steady stream of clues, Elder Deep Fiend, which is an enormous tempo swing in your favor, and Decimator of the Provinces, which is a huge overrun effect attached to a gigantic hasty body. Next up we have Blue-Black, which is another one of our tribal decks of the format, and this one is Zombies. A few of the zombies that common and uncommon for this archetype include Ghoul Caller's Accomplice, which can exile from your graveyard to give you a zombie token. Ingenious Scob is a decent little zombie with a couple of upsides. And Drunau Corpse Trawler is 2 zombies on 1 card that can also give your other zombies you control Death Touch. A couple of payoffs for this deck include Compelling Deterrent, which is a bounce spell that also makes your opponent discard a card if you have a zombie, and Graph Harvest, which gives your zombies menace and can create more zombies itself. There just so happens to be several rares and mythics that you should let pull you into this deck, including Gisa and Geralf, which lets you cast zombies from your graveyard, Relentless Dead, which can keep coming back to your hand or even return a different zombie to your hand. Geralf's Masterpiece is an enormous flying zombie that has the ability to keep coming back that hopefully doesn't have to shrink too much. Diregraph Colossus enters bigger based on your dead zombies and can keep creating more zombies for free. And Forgotten Creation is a nice little value zombie with upside. Our next deck is Blue-Red, and yep, you guessed it, we've got an instant and sorcery deck. We get this deck a lot, but once again, that means we're just pretty familiar with how it needs to be built to function. We'll start with some of those instants and sorceries for the deck, with Tormenting Voice, which is a nice card draw spell. Shreds of Sanity can return a key spell from your graveyard to your hand if needed. Incendiary Flow is an outstanding removal spell. Galvanic Bombardment is a shock variation and one of those collect 'em all type spells. Fiery Temper can deal 3 damage to any target and even has Madness. And Drag Under is a bounce spell that draws a card. A few of the payoffs for casting this many spells include Mercurial Geists, which gets huge with not much help. Pieces of the Puzzle can find you a couple more spells to keep the chain going. Pyrehound is our classic creature that keeps growing and growing with more and more spells. And Thermo Alchemist can ping your opponent every time you cast another spell. A couple of rares you might want to let pull you into this deck include Burn from Within, which is just a huge fireball with upside, and Bedlam Reveler, which is cheaper based on instants and sorceries in your graveyard, has prowess, and can refill your hand. And our last deck in today's video is Black-White, which is billed as a deck built around tokens. We usually get at least one go-wide deck per format, and this happens to be that deck for this format, so let's take a look at some of our token makers, starting with Haunted Dead, which gives us a spirit token on ETB and can come back to the battlefield from your graveyard. Ghoul Caller's Accomplice can be exiled from your graveyard to give you a zombie token. Gisa's Bidding can make 2 zombie tokens with 1 card. Call the Bloodline can continually make zombies at the cost of cards in your hand. Nearheath Chaplain can exile from your graveyard to get you 2 flying spirit tokens. And Dauntless Cathar can also exile from your graveyard for another spirit token. A couple of payoffs for going wide include Bound by Moonsilver, which is a removal spell that can move around at the expense of you sacrificing some of those expendable tokens. Borrowed Grace can act as an instant speed overrun if you pay for its escalation cost. And Morkrut Necropod is a huge creature with menace that just requires you to sacrifice some of those cheaper tokens when it attacks or blocks. A couple of rares and mythics that might pull you into the deck like this include Sorin Grim Nemesis, which is simply just a great planeswalker, and in Limited, those are hard to pass up, and Noose Graph Mob, which can keep creating more and more zombie tokens as people keep casting spells. Thanks so much for sticking around till the end of this video. If you are still here, I'm always excited for the release of this video because I know it will be beneficial for you all to have access to this information in one place in case you want to revisit this video throughout the week. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to share it with a friend or two, as there's a decent chance they might like it as well. If you're already subscribed to the channel, thanks so much for being here today, and if you're not, go ahead and click that subscribe button to stay on top of set review season and have access to consistent high-quality drafts as soon as the set launches on Arena. Looks like that'll do it for today's video, and I'll see you next time here at Daily Draft.